Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a Euractiv hybrid conference supported by Europa Bio. We're discussing today the EU pharma legislation. Is Europe's biotech innovation in the balance? So Europe has a complex biotech landscape. The market is on course to be worth a staggering $1,848.5 billion by 2030. That's more than double the current market value of $800 billion. But for the thousands of companies that make up this space, competing in this space, trying to discover and develop life-changing therapies, diagnostic equipment, vaccines, and advanced medicinal products, especially for those, of course, with rare disease, the rules to innovation and financing are complex and differ across member states. Now, this is a stark reality given the fact that we are, of course, at the advent of technological change. We are just beginning to understand what AI can do for us. EU companies should be on the verge on new innovation, gene therapies and medical breakthroughs. Now, as you all know, in April, the EU outlined a revised legislative pharma package to make the bloc a hub for medical innovation. The goal is to make the EU an attractive and innovation-friendly environment for research, for development and production of medicines in Europe. But as we know, the US maintains its top position. China continues to redefine its position in the global pharma industry. And here's just one stat. China outperforms the EU by over 300 billion euros on research and development. So what is this legislation actually going to do? Will it invigorate European ambitions? Where are the opportunities, the bottlenecks? What more is needed to move the needle? So before we get to our panelists, some of course are assembled on stage, some are joining online. We're going to have a bit of housekeeping. So of course you are all being live streamed. So if you don't want to be recorded, duck out now. And if you do have any questions, audience, I'm looking at you now. And of course the audience joining online, do put them in our Slido app. You can scan the QR code. It's very easy. The QR code is there on the screens right now. Or what we might even try to do is have an open mic, so a mic can be passed around the room. You can also download the new Europa Bio report by scanning the QR code as well. So please do get involved. You can find out more about the kind of biotechnology that is taking place now. Okay, so let's introduce the panelists then. First of all, joining online, we have MEP Tomislav Sokol. He's a member of the European Parliament's Health Committee and a leading voice in the European Parliament on health issues. He's there, yes. And pleasure to see you as always, MEP Sokol. And as always, get ready for some probing questions. Next, we have Hilda Stevens, who sits next to me. She's a co-director at the Institute for Interdisciplinary Innovation in Healthcare at ULB University. Welcome. Next, we have Kirsten Thompson. She is the Chief Operating Officer at Eurocare, a company dealing in synthetic biology. Joining online as well, we have Vivian Sevilecki. She's a Chief Operating Officer at Theracell, a leading Greek biotech company. So it's been great to hear your reflections on your company and how everything is going for you. Okay, so let's let the panelists introduce themselves. Over first to MEP Sokol.
Thank you. I think for organizing this, I think it's a very timely event because we speak about something which is very, very important, and that is the pharma legislation. We know that European Union is lagging behind the US in terms of innovation, in terms of approving and developing new medicines. But also now China is also picking up pace more and more, as you also mentioned. So we definitely have to do something to remain competitive, to remain strong in the global market, and to be able to bring production of medicines to Europe as much as possible. I think we should definitely, when we speak about the pharma legislation, start from the objective. And the objective is to have quality medicines and to have quality healthcare available to all European citizens. But this cannot be done without a strong industry, without stimulating innovation, without providing incentives for developing new cutting-edge medicines on the European territory. So I think that these two interests are not opposite. I think they are complementary. So without a very strong industry, industry without strong system of incentives, without a clear legal framework which stimulates development of new medicines, we cannot have quality healthcare in the European Union, and that is our objective, and that is my objective in the European Parliament, to make this legislation a real game changer so that we can really develop much more medicines in Europe than it has been possible up until now. In the last 20 years, we've had some positive developments, special incentives and special legislation for orphan drugs, for rare diseases, but this is definitely not enough. So we need a clearer, more systematic regulation of this. We need to stimulate development of new medicines, and we need to create an ecosystem where companies, especially small companies, can develop their medicines without all the obstacles, without the unnecessary administration, without all the hurdles that they have to face now. So I'm optimistic that we will be able to get this done. The first reading in the Parliament. Obviously, the whole legislation cannot be finished before elections, but I hope that the first reading in the Parliament will be finished before elections, before the end of this mandate, so that after the elections, the new Parliament can start negotiations with the Council. If we are not able to do that, we'll lose at least another year, and this is something that the patients in Europe cannot afford. So I think we have to get to work, and this is something which is crucial for all of us.
Hilde.
Yes, so I'm Hilde Stevens, co-director of I3H, and what we do at the I3H Institute is really interdisciplinary research and education. Some of the research projects really touch upon the GPL as it is. We, for example, are involved together with Imperial College London in a project that really tries to measure the impact and the equity implications of incentives, incentive mechanisms and policies on innovation more upstream than the incentives downstream, HTA, for example. And there I would say that systematic regulation really requires a systematic review of what works and what doesn't work, and to have a measurement, the impact of the policies installed, to see where we need to reinforce and what doesn't work or not as it should be, to target key unmet areas. We need more transparency of data, and it really, for academics, it's really hard. So this is really one of the key points I would like to make, that it's very difficult to make evidence-based policy recommendations. This is, for example, one thing we do at the Institute. Another thing that touches upon the rare disease incentives is also working with PhD researchers who, for example, one looks at SMA, spinal muscular atrophy, and neurodegenerative rare disease, looking at the cost of medicines, how many medicines are on the market, what is the competition there, which target groups, so really looking at precision medicine, how early we need it, because there we really see an issue that we lag behind the US with respect to access to medicines, early access to medicines for patients. With respect to I would say also an implementation project we set up yesterday actually a not-for-profit company where we try to really scale up a mini lab developed by a professor at ULB here in Brussels together with MSF, and we now want to deploy it much larger outside the areas of MSF, so really going for mini lab to tackle low resource settings, so affordable access for all, which then tackles upon the policies that are directed towards the simulation of AMR or antimicrobial drugs.
Collaboration there, and we'll touch upon that a bit later. Kristen.
Yes, I'm Kristen Thompson. I'm Chief Operating Officer at YourCare, which is a small venture capital investment company. We invest in synthetic biology, which of course includes a lot of products in this advanced medicinal space, also rare disease. And our aim is to really catalyze the innovative projects coming out of academia into successful biotechs, which then can be commercialized, or also to take existing biotechs and to really I would say, put equity into those and to help them, go further than they normally could, usually using non-dilutive money.
Okay, well, I guess Hilda's really happy to be sat next to you right now then. Next, over to Vivian.
Hello, I'm happy to be joining the conversation and actually representing an SME. We are an emerging SME. We are headquartered in Athens, Greece. Our aim is to develop, manufacture advanced therapy medicinal products. We are in a joint venture with another company, or Genesis, and together we do want to implement decentralized manufacturing in order to make cell and gene therapy products available, affordable, and accessible to all Europeans.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so you've heard the sort of opening gambit from our panelists then. Kristen, I'll come to you, and then Vivian, you can also add in to this question. So this legislation then, is it the great equalizer that the European Commission is really hoping for to give European companies, big and of course the smaller ones, the opportunity to compete with the likes of the US or China, or was it just an exercise in legislating?
It's definitely not going to be the great equalizer, unfortunately. I think, if anything, this is going to worsen a situation which is already critical. We definitely saw in COVID that Europe starts to be, unfortunately, behind China and the US when it comes to innovation and to commercialization of medicines for patients. And this, I believe, legislation will just further drive home the point that Europe is stuck in this kind of endless loop of policy and needing to define things to such a point that it is really endangering small startups in Europe and endangering our ability to take innovation to the market.
Okay, so Vivian, is it too much policy and too much red tape?
I do agree that it certainly puts a lot of strain on us, that we are already under pressure. We are facing many challenges in the development that we have to do. It's very difficult to raise investment. It's very difficult to be able to bring a product into the market. And the timelines that are set for companies, the regulatory requirements, all these make it a lot more difficult for us. So this pharmaceutical legislation makes it even more difficult. There are certain aspects of it that are positive, like the streamlining of the regulatory process, but there are others that are really making it more difficult for us, and we can dive into this further on the discussion, I think.
Okay, so I've got to go back to MEP Sokol on this one then. You were bringing up the next legislative cycle. Now you've heard what two of your other panelists have said. So let's zero in then on this aspect of opportunity for EU companies and the consequences of not getting this legislation right. And before you answer, I'm going to give you a few quotes that I've picked out. So Europa Bio said, a blunt one-size-fits-all approach may have unintended consequences, potentially hampering Europe's ability to develop and identify therapies independently, ultimately relegating it to a tertiary market for therapies developed elsewhere. They also add that there are 27 different pricing and reimbursement pathways. So obviously, each member state has their own policy and ways of marketing. FPS says, if the EU pharma legislation goes ahead in its current form, then Europe is set to lose another 1/3 of its R&D by 2040. It will cost Europe around €2 billion a year. I mean, none of this is very positive, is it really?
Yeah, you know that I'm sometimes a party breaker when I say when I discern what we can do and what we cannot do on European level. Pricing and reimbursement is a national competence, so this is something that we cannot really do a lot about. But what we can do is make EU legislation such that we have predictability for companies, and that is very important because what the Commission is proposing now to reduce the incentives the baseline incentives, which are guaranteed, so the regulatory data protection, but to increase the potential possibilities to get additional incentives on top of that to have more years of regulatory data protection in the end. The problem with that is that this is something that is not certain. You cannot count on this. You cannot make business plans based on something which is not, which is unpredictable, and this depends a lot on outside factors, and this is definitely not good for the company. So if companies get additional incentives depending on factors which are outside of their control, this is not very good for planning future investments. So what I think should be the starting point is that the baseline, the guaranteed incentives are not reduced as proposed by the Commission, to leave them in a kind of in a situation where they are now approximately, but then to see what are the areas where we have gaps. For instance, pediatric medicines developed specifically for children, medicines for rare diseases, etc., where still more than 90% of the patients do not have available treatment for rare diseases at all in Europe, and to provide additional incentives there. But it's very important that these incentives are not made in a way that they depend on factors which are outside of companies' control. So this predictability is very, very important, and retaining this baseline of data protection. On the other aspects, I think there are some positive aspects to the Commission's proposal. The idea of streamlining and fastening the procedure in front of EMA. We saw during the pandemic then that vaccines were approved much faster than was typically the case for medicines in front of EMA. So if this could be done for medicines, if for medicines we could be fast for vaccines, if we could be faster for vaccines, if we could get rid of certain unnecessary administrative steps in the whole process, why not use the same approach for other medicines as well? So I think, of course, we have to protect safety of medicines and provide all the controls which are necessary in the approval procedure. But obviously, if we approve the vaccines, if we consider them to be safe, then obviously there is a possibility to reduce this procedure, the length of this procedure, without jeopardizing safety, also for other medicines as well. So I think definitely what Commission proposes goes in the right direction. I think they could be even more ambitious. So also reducing certain deadlines, especially the deadline for the Commission giving the final okay after the EMA procedure has finished. And this is something that I support. And with my amendments, I want to go even further in terms of streamlining and simplifying and fastening the whole procedure. Also, I think the idea of sandbox is a good thing. So the idea that for new innovative medicines, we could have a more flexible regulatory procedure to see how it works, so that we are not so rigid in terms of the whole regulatory environment for approving new medicines. I think for small companies, this is especially important because all of this administrative burden that EU imposes upon them is especially problematic for them, because big companies have big legal departments, etc. So they are more equipped to handle all of this bureaucracy, but small companies not. So this idea of using these sandboxes to have a more flexible approach for developing new medicines is something very good. Unfortunately, my position is not shared by everybody in the European Parliament. The leftist political groups who are to the left of the center, it seems to me that are trying to use this whole legislation to score some political points for elections. And it's easy to score political points by attacking the industry. So I think they consider this probably to be an easy target. So they go even further than the Commission in some areas against the industry. For instance, the main rapporteur for the regulation, for which I'm the EPP shadow rapporteur, and the main rapporteur is from the Socialists. He wants to get rid of the sandboxes. He wants to get rid of the voucher for antimicrobials. He wants to reduce the regulatory data protection even more than proposed by the Commission. And this is something which definitely is not a good approach, because industry has to be our partner. We cannot provide equal and timely access to medicines in Europe without having a good regulatory environment for industry. And as I said, if we want to be competitive, if we want to be less dependent on outside powers like China, India, etc., we need to provide stronger incentives than we have now. So I think, so this is kind of my approach. I think we have to be partners with the industry, see what we can do to stimulate development of new medicines. But what is most important is to focus on those areas where we have the biggest gaps and where the need is the biggest, which means we have to help small companies. We have to provide stronger incentives for orphan drugs and for pediatric medicines, so medicines which are specifically developed for children, and not be populistic, not to score some easy political points, but to really be serious and try to see how we can work together with the industry to have better healthcare in Europe.
Thank you, MEP Sokol. I think that was a good dose of realism there for everyone who's watching. And I'll allow Kristen and Vivian to come back on that, but I want to come to you, Hilda, then. You heard a lot of the kind of realism, you could say, that Europe needs more ambition. There's too much burden, especially on small companies, from our MEP in our panel. But set the scene then for us as to where you believe the EU biotech industry is and how this pharma legislation could transform the landscape if it's done in the right way. And it really would be interesting to get your insights, especially looking at it from the aspect of the people needed on the ground, to make this innovation, the healthcare professionals, the PhD students, the people running clinical trials. Tell us a little bit more about, who's involved.
Well, actually, the I3H Institute, and this is really the basis going 10 years almost back, next year, was set up by Michel Goldman, who at that time came from IMI, the Innovative Medicines Initiative, now IHI. And he, with all what he saw, the ways academia and biotech and big pharma collaborated together with regulators and patients, patient advocates, he saw that there was much more needed to educate the next generation of healthcare professionals, wherever sector you enter, what your background is, or where you head to the future. So he set up the interdisciplinary program in healthcare innovation that really joins master students, PhD students, postdocs, with coming from different backgrounds, going from basic research to medicines, reaching the patient and back, looking up on all the different challenges, but also obviously highlighting the opportunities from the technical point of view, from the regulatory point of view, patient point of view. Patient centricity for sure is key. From an investment point of view. And this was an academic program. It runs in different faculties, overall universities in Belgium and beyond. And there we saw that Europe, and we have a great example with the VIB, the Flemish Institute for Biotechnology, Europe has an enormous potential in terms of biotech. There's an enormous potential to have academic inventions be translated into spin-off companies, but there was a need for an advanced master really in biotech and medtech ventures. So teaching people, or not teaching, help them develop further with respect to all the change, all challenges, looking at Europe, comparing with the US, comparing with Japan. And this master has been set up by I3H and the Solvay Brussels School of Economics and Management, and is headed now by the former Dean Philippe Vergouwen and Marc Deschamps, who was last year awarded as Biotech Manager of the Year. It's really from experts to people who want to manage next or who want to be involved in C-level biotech companies from different perspectives taught by experts in the field. And there I think that a gap is filled. It won't solve the problem, but much more needs, and again, I'm coming there, much more need to be evidence-based education where people see what practically works, what doesn't, how we compare, how we can compare Europe, and how we need to reinforce to compete with China and US.
But leaving China and the US aside, I mean, there seems to be a breakdown in collaboration somewhere within the chain within Europe. So where is that? Where is this breakdown happening on this sort of EU level, or within the EU? So,
I would say, well, if we look at breakdown, I think there is much more need for incentivizing public-private partnerships at all stages, really from early basic research to clinical trial research or clinical trial development to really market access and seeing how we can earlier grant access to patients. There, I think we need harmonization, and we need to collaborate really at all stages. If we think about ATMPs, I think there is a need for registries, European registries, where data can be shared in the most sensitive way, obviously, but centers of excellence where patients can really benefit from the added value care that specialists, an interdisciplinary team can bring. And I think there we can really target centers of excellence and not do everything everywhere.
Okay, so Kirsten, let's bring you in there. So as a VC, I mean, talk to us a little bit more about your company, but I mean, are you attracted to European companies, or is it too difficult for you to get involved if there's too much red tape?
So we only invest in European companies, and the rationale for that at the inception of YourCare was that there is a lot of untapped European innovation. However, there is a translation problem of that innovation into successful biotechs. And so we said, okay, if we source these directly from academia, or we find promising biotechs, and then we are there to basically handhold with them so that they have an experienced team next to them along with capital, can we push the needle to go for success? I do believe that to be the case, and this kind of comes back on your point on having an educated workforce and having this, Solvay's Masters, and I'm a very big fan of that program. However, the problem is that in Europe, being competitive is sometimes seen as being not very nice. And
so it's a mindset issue.
It is. There is a mindset issue, clearly a mindset issue in Europe. However, this mindset penetrates all levels, all the way up to our legislation, which I think is the point of why we're here today. Because we get wrapped into these kind of endless loops of where we say we want to help, we want to control everything, but let us stay on our conservative laurels. And that is a big problem, because we're in a risk industry here. Innovation in the healthcare space is very risky, because if we knew the answer already, there would be no need to do clinical trials. And well, since this is a therapy for patients and humans, we must do clinical trials. There's no way around that. So that means you need to find people willing to take a risk at the very early stages of innovation. They're only going to take a risk if there is a reward. No reward, no risk will be taken, especially in Europe, where the majority of VCs have a very conservative mindset. Now, is Europe starting to become more attractive to Europe and China? Absolutely. However, they want to bring those opportunities outside of Europe, because they say Europe is too complex. There is too much red tape, the ecosystem is too slow, and there's not enough capital. So this current piece of legislation is not going to help encourage people that Europe is willing to go faster, except for, as I think has already been mentioned, streamlining some of the regulatory processes. But then we get back into this question again of, oh, is my product just unmet medical need, or is it high unmet medical need? And all the terms and all the definitions then become very difficult for a company to anticipate what is our return on investment that we can offer to our investors. So if the investor cannot calculate that they will then have a successful ROI on their risk, they'll say, I walk away. I'm not going to get involved. That's it. And if it's too difficult to do that, then the whole ecosystem will just fully depend on non-dilutive money, which isn't a viable model in the end.
Before we go to Vivian, I want to ask you then, so, I mean, what would you have liked this legislation to have done to really have broken that conservative mold?
Yeah, well, I think reducing, of course, protection for any company, this is not the right way to start. I do understand that we want to offer medications to patients at reasonable prices, but I think more legislation which is supporting innovation to be able to return on their investment is what we need to focus on. And then there'll be other ways to return this money back to the patients at the end, like promoting innovation to have better manufacturing processes. I think streamlining the regulatory process is going to help. That's going to bring costs down. But rather than putting the pressure on and saying, okay, we're going to offer you less protection, we're going to offer more difficult scenarios for you to be able to find a pharma partner at the end of the day who's also willing to take a risk, that for me was not the right way to start. So let's go further. Let's say we keep everything where it is and we offer even more incentives to SMEs. Let's drive the innovation envelope as far as we can. Now, maybe there should be as well, in my personal opinion, some protection of European IP as well, so that we don't have a drain on innovation outside of Europe. If US companies want to come in and Chinese companies want to come in, maybe they need to pay a price for that, a different price than what Europeans would. And I say that as an American.
Okay, Vivian, your thoughts? I mean, as a small company, I mean, does this legislation incentivize, companies like yourselves?
Definitely, I have some things I would like to add. So I would like to say that nothing that's not solidly available at the time of decision making for a venture capital or private equity can be a positive influence, especially in an already fragile innovation landscape, taking into account other challenges, geopolitical, inflation, cost of capital for an investor. Therefore, we do need clear definitions, clear timelines. We cannot, search between the definitions. What is an orphan drug? How long do I have? And how long will I be protected? The high unmet need and unmet medical need, as Kirsten alluded to. This will allow us to take advantage of everything that is given to us. Also, something that is very important to be able to attract capital is, I think, we need to bridge the gap between academic institutions and biotech companies. We need to realize and clearly focus on translational research and the value of creating value, making products. And basically, it's not because we are aggressive, it's because we want to address people's needs. It's because we want to be able to offer better new therapies to all Europeans. Therefore, this also is something that we need to consider. So from the side of an SME that's seeking to attract investment, besides all the micro parameters focusing on the company itself, the good pipeline, the talented people, which are plenty in Europe, the solid work that's already there, we do need micro parameters to also be favorable for us, like to have available an ecosystem that will support drug development from translation through to clinical research and to marketing authorization, even though marketing authorization for an SME would probably have to partner with a more mature biotech. So we do need to have availability of expert knowledge, a favorable regulatory framework to facilitate through the very difficult stages of the development, especially the early development. We do need to consider that we need to foster partnerships and collaboration with other SMEs and big pharma. So the presence of organizations, association, innovation hubs, all these do help a lot, but definitely the environment and the ecosystem would have to be really favorable and really help innovation.
Unfortunately, I think Vivian has frozen, but we'll come back to it. Semi Sokol, let me follow up with you on the points that Vivian especially was raising there. I mean, how can smaller companies, SMEs, use this new farmers legislation package to really help them compete in the space where obviously big pharma has the biggest stake, you could say?
Yeah, I think we need to change it. We need to change a lot of things which Commission proposed. As I said, I think we have to we have to have clear definitions. I agree with that. So this is why I propose to delete the high unmet medical need, this concept, and to replace it with breakthrough medicines, which I believe will provide a much clearer definition and clearer parameters that we have. What is also important here is so I think that's something very important on the incentives. As I said, more predictability, so have a guaranteed baseline incentive, and then to focus for additional incentives in those areas where need is the biggest. Also streamlining and making and even more simplifying the procedure. That's also some in front of EMA. That's something which I think is also very important. What we have to keep is, as I said, the sandbox, because this gives possibility to have to experiment and to try out new regulatory approaches towards new medicines without such a big regulatory burden, without such a big bureaucracy. And I think for small companies this is especially relevant. On having special incentives for small and medium-sized enterprises, that's always questionable how legally this can be done, but it's something that's definitely possible to look at. But I would like to also add that this legislation is not the silver bullet which will solve all the problems. So we have a lot of pieces of EU legislation on healthcare level which can make the difference. So first, I would like to mention European Health Data Space, for which I'm the rapporteur, and now we are negotiating with the Council on that, because the need to access data has been mentioned a lot, and definitely for developing new medicines, especially for rare diseases where you don't have enough patients to conduct phase 3 clinical trials. Having more real-world evidence available, having more data available from the actual medical practice is of crucial importance. And this is why we have to have a European health data space, which will make it possible for also small companies to access data without having to pay big fees for that, under the same conditions, under positive conditions, under beneficial conditions as researchers, as universities, etc. Because health data space can really make it possible for small and medium-sized enterprises to access data which that otherwise they couldn't have. Also, what is of extreme importance is, even though, as I said, that pricing and reimbursement is a national competence, we need more coordination and more transparency. So we have a transparency directive from 1989, 35 years old, which has never been changed. And this legislation, unfortunately, is really not up to its task. So I believe that in the next mandate, we have to strive for revision of the transparency directive to make national procedures for deciding on reimbursing medicines much clearer, much more transparent, with a clear uniform set criteria, which can then be make it much easier for companies to prepare for these national procedures and to have their medicines reimbursed. And I believe that can make really the final stage of approval of medicines to be paid for from the public purse much better, much faster than it is now. Of course, whenever somebody tried to change, whenever the Commission or the Parliament tried to change the Transparency Directive, some member states were against that. But really, we cannot have equal access to medicines in all EU member states without more clear, more transparent rules on pricing and reimbursement. And the EU has the competence to act there, but we need more political will to do it. Also, what is very important that has also been mentioned, centers of excellence. So not developing resources in all member states for everything, but to really focus on most important areas on Europe, and why not having centers of excellence for certain diseases, for especially rare diseases, which cover more than one member state. So this is definitely something which is much more efficient, which is much better in terms of providing faster healthcare to patients, and having better organization and better use of resources. That's not that much related to small and medium-sized companies, but in terms of providing better healthcare in Europe, this is something that we can do, and this is something that definitely can also make a difference. And this is something that I fully support. But if we want to do that, we need more EU funding. We need the European system of certification of these centers of excellence, and we need much clearer rules on cross-border healthcare than we have now. And this is something that I've been advocating strongly since the beginning of the mandate, to change this whole legal framework on cross-border healthcare to make it much clearer and much more streamlined than it is now. Of course, there are other pieces of legislation, a lot of reporting and a lot of obligations that imposed to the industry because of the Green Deal legislation. So a lot of new reporting related to environmental protection, related to forced labor, to all other areas, which is not bad in itself. So having, if we look this in an isolated way, all of these reporting mechanisms and all of these reporting obligations, they're not problematic. But if you took all of them together, when we accumulate all of these additional obligations, bureaucratic obligations, administrative obligations that we impose for the industry, this presents an enormous problem. So definitely we need to cut red tape. We need to see which of these obligations that we impose on small and medium-sized companies are not necessary, are not crucial, which can be joined together. And I think that definitely we have a lot of work cut out for us. Obviously, we cannot do a lot in the next 3 months before the end of the mandate of the parliament. But I believe in the next mandate, with the next parliament and next commission, we will really have to look at all of this EU legislation in a more systematic way. So not kind of in isolated boxes, but to really see the whole landscape and see what we can do really to reduce all of these obligations which are imposed on our industry.
Okay, thank you, MEP Sokol. So just to pick up with Chris and Hilda on what MEP Sokol was talking about there. So he was talking about the tools and problems that SMEs have. He used the word data, funding, red tape. And then I think also, I'll come to you first, Hilda, because you were also discussing the education of the workforce. So there is one thing that we haven't discussed yet, something that could help SMEs, which is AI. And AI could really help with drug discovery, but that obviously needs a lot of, retraining, reskilling, and that perhaps would be costly to especially small companies. So what are your thoughts then, especially taking into consideration everything that MEP Sokol talked about then?
Okay, with respect to indeed AI, you need to train people for sure, but there's a huge untapped, I think, potential with respect to active ingredients that can be repurposed. Well, I had a question actually for MEP Sokol.
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
With respect to, okay, if you turn or if you delete unmet needs and high unmet needs and would translate it into breakthrough medicine, how do you define breakthrough medicine? Because there's a huge difference between breakthrough innovation and just incremental small line extensions. How do you incentivize this? How do you measure it? Again, it's about measuring and seeing what effects you have with certain incentives. Because if you talk about innovation, what is innovation? It's an added value for the patient. You need to bring in their voice. It's also about education in this way. And there are so many initiatives ongoing and training of patients. They are the experts of their disease. They know what their disease does to them and how quality of life can be added. So you need to reward an addition of quality of life. But how would you define breakthrough medicines then?
I will not go into detail now because we are currently negotiating that at this very moment. So this is something which is pretty sensitive. We are now trying to find the political agreement between the groups in the European Parliament. So speaking now publicly about what we propose maybe is not the best way how to do it at this time. But if you want, we can arrange a separate meeting and go more into detail on that, on what's going on. But as I said, I do not want to now go into details on this while we are at the very moment negotiating the exact wording on this. So whatever I say will not be definitely the end result of the negotiations, if you can understand that. But definitely we can have a separate bilateral meeting and go more into detail then on this particular topic, especially once we know the direction in which the negotiations will proceed. Okay.
Yeah, maybe then just to finish on the AI question, that I think, well, really we need to look at strong ethical and legal frameworks. And then just, I think this week or last week, don't remember, WHO also really tapped upon this, that we need to think and reflect. And of course, the legal framework will always run behind science. But if we don't start questioning this much more now and train people to reflect upon this, we will have.
But the problem is that then you fall into that typical EU dilemma where they're too scared of new technology and they over-legislate and they bring rules. I mean, obviously it needs regulation, you know, especially for younger people in society as well. But then if you start talking about rules before understanding the technology, because that's what happens a lot when it comes to AI. The legislators start legislating without a true understanding of what the technology is. You want to say something as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of AI and the concept of digital twins within the healthcare space. And I think that's why it's also very compelling to a lot of VCs. However, the reason I'm interested in that is because I do believe this can be a game changer for SMEs at some point to bring the cost down on processes, but also on clinical trials. So yes, we need to protect individuals' data. But if we do that at the cost of innovation, we'll just be left behind. And so no one will benefit from that because we won't see the cost savings that can provide. Now, to be the devil's advocate, how that's going to fit into the new green plan, I'm not really sure, because AI and I think we all know that the generative AI is extremely non-green in terms of energy consumption and water consumption. And if you've seen the appetite recently for big pharma in AI, you know that they're very much interested in that space. So it would be great as well if they would see this as a challenge to become more green and motivated within that area. Yeah, I have the same feeling that you do. I mean, let us not go into this typical EU conundrum of over-regulating before we even know the potential. Now, if we just let it out there with no regulation at all, then it's very difficult to go back. So, yeah, okay, it's not an easy question to solve, but I do believe we should not let this opportunity pass us by. Let us focus maybe on things like process development, where we know that the risk to individual safety is going to be, greatly decreased. I do believe as well that this is the opportunity for collaboration. It's an opportunity to collaborate for small SMEs with bigger players. It's also the opportunity for SMEs to come together, because let's say you have one SME which is working on process development within the healthcare space, and you have 3 or 4 SMEs which have different IP, but they would all benefit from that. Maybe they can join together on the early days to try to incorporate this, and maybe we should foster more of these type of collaborations within Europe that have an actual return on investment, rather than the money just going into reporting and deliverables. I've seen a lot of great EU projects just get lost. They pay the project coordinator a lot of money to just chase down deliverables. That makes no sense. I don't think that Europe needs to become a venture capitalist on itself, but maybe changing its mindset a little bit to that, on how can we also get a return on our investment of our non-dilutive money, would help deblock the situation a little bit.
Okay. Just to say, please do scan the QR code to ask a question to any of our panelists. There you go. It's right there, and you can also read that report as well. Okay, so picking up on what Kirsten was saying about collaboration, and Vivian, want to get back into the rare disease landscape with you. You're a small biotech company, as we were saying, and I believe you're going through an investment round right now. So what do you need to really offer investors, would you say, so that they commit to a company like you that deals with, cell and gene therapy. What do you need to give them so that they will commit to you in the long term then?
Yes, so investors, regardless if they're venture capitalists or private equities, they're very specifically look for return of their investment. They want to make profit within a reasonable and defined time frame as much as possible. Everyone realizes the value of cell and gene therapies and acknowledges the need to be able to provide definitive treatments for medical problems and not having to rely on symptom management approaches. So in order to achieve investment and retain investment, we need to be able to demonstrate a good pipeline that we can offer a variety of services and increased capabilities that we are able to adapt and expand them in the future. We do need to be talented and committed in running and working in the business. We do need to have solid work already completed and that can be demonstrated and can form basis for building business further. It's very important for SMEs to be able to make partnerships, different stages of development, early on with other SMEs for process development and later on with bigger pharma. So all these parameters are important, and I think all these are scrutinized before an investment comes.
Kristen, would you like to follow up on what Vivian spoke about there?
Oh, I'm not sure that I have a lot to add on top of that, but I definitely agree. I mean, there needs to be the possibility to understand what is my time frame to exit, and that's the question that I get every time I talk to other investors for the companies that we've already invested in. How long is it going to take for this company to be able to exit our portfolio? How long will it take them to get to the market? And once they do get to the market, how long will it take them to tap the full market potential while they still have, any kind of protection? And you say, well, now let's drop this by another year, and then let's decrease this, and let's decrease this, and let's decrease this, and suddenly this is not very attractive anymore. So I agree with Vivian on this point. I think as well for rare diseases, this is so crucial because let us not forget that rare disease is a great innovation model. Most rare diseases are using really innovative, techniques. I mean, this is where a lot of our new technologies are coming from. And so to just cut it off at the knees saying, I'm sorry, but you're never going to get any kind of market return that justifies this cash influx, that's a big problem. And so I think this creates this kind of vicious cycle here where you say, let's shave a little bit off here and a little bit off here and a little bit off here. And what ends up is a completely unattractive opportunity. So if we want to continue not just rare disease innovation, but innovation in general, we need to support, the rare disease innovators because they are doing things which are really groundbreaking.
I don't know if anyone else picked up on this. I think it was on Tuesday. Splashed all across the front pages, at least in the UK. There's a blood test that's come out that measures the protein levels in your blood, and that can detect Alzheimer's I think a decade before someone even shows symptoms. I mean, it's stuff like that is just frankly amazing, isn't it?
It is, but in that case, I mean, that's falling into the preventive medicine category. And today, we don't have any financial motivation to invest in those opportunities because the payer-prescriber system does not support that. So we are supporting the treatment of disease, but we're not supporting the prevention of disease.
What would it take to change for you then?
For me, I mean, I'm personally a big believer in preventive medicine. However, would I invest in it? Probably not, because my shareholders will, hold me over the barrel at the end of the day. But what we need to do is to say, okay, preventive medicine can also have incentives. It can also offer incentives to the patient, responsibility of the individual. But that's really paradigm shifting work that needs to be done. We need insurance companies to see that prevention is actually valuable. and governments as well. And today we're just not there yet.
The EU doesn't add value to preventative medicines.
I don't think so, no. That's maybe a kind of difficult point to make, but today the payer-prescriber system in Europe is not promoting preventive medicine. No, we are not driving exciting diagnostic, possibilities, which I think that's a great place to start, right? If you really want to drive personalized medicine and you really want to drive personalized diagnostics and you want to make sure that you're not missing out on people early on, and how is their mental health and their nutrition linked into all of that?
Exactly. I mean, as someone who comes into the category of patient, I mean, I think for all of us, that sounds pretty amazing to have, more preventative care for the concerns that we have in our daily life. Sophie Sokol, coming to you then. We're talking about preventive medicine. How would you say you can, as an MEP, try to at least ensure that the concerns, the health concerns of the everyday person isn't left behind in this discussion?
It's $1 million question. So what we can do from the EU level is also provide financial incentives. We can finance programs, for instance, when we speak about prevention, because prevention is most cost-effective way of addressing healthcare needs. Sorry. Yeah, the light here goes out automatically if I'm not moving. So this is the way how European Parliament saves electricity. Anyway, so prevention is the most cost-effective way of providing healthcare. Unfortunately, this has not been recognized enough by the member states, by national health authorities. What EU can do is fund projects which go in that direction and to try to provide some kind of financial incentives and stimuluses. But unfortunately, we cannot say to the member states and order them to fund more and provide more funding for treatment A, or which is connected with prevention, than the treatment B. But definitely what we can do is try to engage and coordinate between the member states more as well on this issue. But I wanted to also pick up on what was said about the orphan drugs and about the rare diseases. So as I said, I think rare diseases are one of those areas where we need stronger incentives. This is why I propose that for orphan drugs in general, we leave the 10-year regulatory data protection, while to add additional 2 years for the so-called breakthrough orphan drugs. And since I was asked before about the definition of breakthrough orphan medicines, I said I cannot go into detail now, but the idea is that we focus on those medicines which provide meaningful reduction of morbidity, which provide meaningful reduction of worse health outcomes on one side, and also provide a new and unique mechanism of action, or those medicines for treating diseases for which there is no satisfactory treatment on the EU level. I agree that these definitions in themselves are not completely clear, so you cannot have a definition which kind of is 100% clear and certain, and that it's completely clear what it covers. But what is important is that we also leave possibility for the agency, for EMA, to develop scientific guidelines to be more precise about which treatments this will have. But essentially, these are the two criteria. So first, those breakthrough medicines, orphan medicines are those medicines treating disease for which there is no satisfactory treatment at the EU level, or those with a new and unique mechanism of action, which provides meaningful reduction in morbidity. Let's say, without going into too much detail, and I think for these kind of medicines, we need these additional incentives on top of what we have now. But what we have now, so to leave the 10-year regulatory data protection for orphan medicines, so not to go in the direction of the Commission which reduces it, but then to provide on top of that, on top of this baseline protection, to provide additional 2 years for breakthrough medicines to really stimulate invention of new medicines in those areas where needs are the biggest.
Thank you so much. Vivian, you wanted to jump in. muted? Are you?
Okay,
You're
maybe
muted on
not.
your
No,
side.
no.
Yeah, there you
So
go.
maybe. So I also want to say that I'm very enthusiastic about all the preventive medicine approaches that can be available. Also, imagine therapies that really cure a disease that can also be available. They're really cost effective, and currently they're not a solution for European patients. So because all these either preventive tests or therapies take years to develop. It's a long development process, and it's an extremely expensive development process. I want to really say that we do need the incentives as early as possible, especially SMEs for early stage. And the recent example of the COVID vaccines, how quickly those partnerships developed, how the development process was shortcutted, is a good example. And we do need as much as impetus as possible on the table from the beginning. So yes, it's important to protect the regulatory data. It's part of the IP of a company, because it's an investment to create it in the first place. Yes, the time is needed. So we do not want cut and shortage of the time in order to develop the drugs. We cannot rush clinical trials. It's not safe. Sometimes situations make it difficult for patients to be recruited in clinical trials. So yes, definitely we do need the time and the incentives early on the table from the beginning.
Judging by what you're all saying today, it seems that this legislation really isn't up to task. To quote a song, 99 problems, and definitely the legislation is one of many. I can see that you're furiously writing away. So what are you actually thinking of? Tell us.
No, I was thinking indeed about the ATMP, Zolgensma, that this is a perfect example of where there are changes needed all over the innovation cycle. And it started with, well, here in Belgium, Baby Pia, I think the Belgian people know her. There was the cure Zolgensma, a one-time gene therapy. But this baby couldn't access it because it was in the US. There was a crowdfunding where people had to send an SMS, €2. They got to the 2 million euro to give the Baby Pia that access. Now, HTA, at HTA level, at health technology assessment level, there's the collaboration Benelux, which really did a joint procurement, decreasing the price for the health system, where I think we can learn a lot from and really build upon the lessons learned. Zolgensma now is really, there is at a patient level a prenatal screening installed in Belgium, that because this drug needs to be given as early as possible, prenatal screening also really very important for the patient care. This data can be collected in registries. We can do research upon this. Then indeed, obviously, there's an improved quality of life. Normally, this patient wouldn't have survived until now. Now she goes to school. It's amazing to see. But indeed, also for this administration of Zolgensma, I think collaboration is needed with different disciplines in centers of excellence. We don't need to repeat things all over the European member states. And I think through collaborations, we can do a lot of things and earlier access can be given. And if there's an, if SMEs need to or can get extra or an extra monopoly time through giving access to therapies in all 27 EU member states, for an SME, this is nearly impossible given the limited resources. Through collaborations at different levels, I think we can do much more. So I think collaboration here and interdisciplinary collaboration is key.
Okay, well, let's go.
Writing.
Well, listen, look, you can keep scribbling away while I ask some of these questions then. Here's a question for Kristen. The Commission's proposal aims at expanding the hospital exemption for ATMPs. How big a risk does it represent for companies involved in cell gene therapies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is definitely risky because cell and gene therapies are definitely going to come under fire in the next 2 to 3 years. They're going to come under fire because these are extremely costly therapies. And how can you well translate the cost of improving or saving a patient's life to a product that costs between 300,000 and 1 million? And on top of that, the manufacturing process is very expensive. These are highly skilled personnel which are needed to run those manufacturing processes. And so every euro is going to count, right? Because you're going to really come under the radar. And I think that that's going to have a massive pressure because you really need to, I think that this exemption, it's not going to help to motivate people to invest into that space and to really drive this to what we need in order to find this fine balance between cost acceptability, but also innovative therapy. And it makes me think of a very sad story that I use as a cautionary tale very quickly. And I worked with a biotech company which had a very nice product which had wonderful data and would have prevented antibiotic resistance for a number of different drugs. Now, this product was not seen as being very sexy, let's put it that way, because it wasn't within this, cell and gene therapy space. And so the price which they were able to charge was not very high. So that did not attract a lot of investor money and it did not attract a lot of big pharma. So the company said, okay, let's transition away from this antibiotic space and let's go into immuno-oncology, a much hotter space. They had very, very nice data there, but then what came back? Investors said, oh, sorry, but your product still isn't very sexy. So not only are you able to treat AMR and are you able to improve cancer patients' life, but because this is not able to get a very large price point, we're not going to invest. And the company eventually went bankrupt with a very nice product that they could have commercialized as a medical device directly in Europe. However, because they were not able to get enough investor money to do that, they decided first to start in the US, where this was a drug. And because it was under a drug designation, it was not seen as a very exciting product. So today, that product, which could be in the hands of patients today, is not available. Now, I tell this as a cautionary tale because I don't want the same thing to happen to the cell and gene therapy space. And if we're not careful, we will drive it into that. And that's the best I can answer your question, I think.
I won't lie. Okay, next question to Mr. Sokol, and it's from Okadad. It says, in light of the faster access to medical innovations in the US compared to Europe, so again, touching a little bit on what Kirsten was talking about, what actions can the EU take to accelerate the availability of new treatments while maintaining high safety and efficacy standards? MEP Sokol.
Yeah, so we have two procedures. So just to make this clear, and we have to distinguish them. So first is the question of approving new medicines to be put on the market itself. This is what is the prerogative of EMA. Of course, the final decision by the Commission, but EMA is the one who does the evaluation process. After that, after we approve the new medicines to be put on the market, so on the entire European market, so you go to EMA instead of having to go to 27 national agencies. But after that, whether this medicine will be reimbursed or not, and under which price, is decided by each individual member state. So we have two stages if we want to get medicines available for the patients. When we speak about the EMA procedure, so as I said, the proposal goes in a good direction. So some things are some things are definitely made faster and more simple. I believe that we can do more. I propose certain amendments along those lines, but the crucial thing is to reduce the the things which are repeated, which are purely bureaucratic, which take a long time, but without obviously jeopardizing the safety and efficacy of the evaluation process itself. Also, I believe that we can shorten the final approval procedure by the Commission, because after EMA has done all the work, then the Commission needs to make the final decision. I personally think that this is completely unnecessary. I think that it's possible to give the mandate to EMA to make the final decision itself, instead of losing additional days or weeks for the Commission to make this decision. But we don't have the political landscape to do that, but at least shorten these deadlines as much as possible, so that the Commission has to make the final decision on basis of EMA evaluation within a few days. So I think that here we've done a lot. As I said, I propose in my amendments to cut down on some of the deadlines within the whole process itself, but definitely this is something that we can do. On the next step, on the pricing and reimbursement, here we definitely have problem, and the problem is that we have different national procedures, different national criteria that are completely non-harmonized, and unfortunately they are not transparent in the same way. So in some member states you have a very clear published criteria how these decisions on pricing and reimbursement are made, but in some countries you have a very broad and vague criteria, and these decisions are done by certain committees of the health insurance funds without any clear procedural rules, without clear guidelines, and without clear published criteria on how to do that. So to change this, as I said, we need to revise the Transparency Directive. We need to make sure that all national authorities publish their procedures and their criteria publicly, and then when they approve certain medicines for reimbursement, that we know what criteria they used to make this decision. So this is something which I think is very necessary on the tying of incentives and access, because we have this in the commission proposal. This is something that is definitely a problem for SMEs, because it's hard for a small company to put a medicine at the same time on all 27 national markets. While on the other hand, it's true that certain medicine, that it takes some medicines several years more to get into a market of Bulgaria or Croatia than to get to the German or French market as well. So we need to find some kind of a balance there. I think what my colleague from Pernille Weiss proposed goes in the right direction, that you do not tie incentives with access, but that when a member state makes a request to provide a certain medicine, this has to be done as soon as possible. I think this is a good approach, so that we guarantee that member states will get those medicines that they need approximately at the same time, but not to force the companies to initially file for reimbursement in all 27 national markets, because this is something which for small companies is definitely a problem. But as I said, it's necessary, it's crucial that when there is a need for a medicine in a certain member state, that this can be set there, and that this can be acquired as soon as possible. And I think that the negotiations in the parliament will go in that direction, because we cannot have first and second class citizens anymore. So it cannot be the case that in some member states it takes 1 year for medicine after EMA approval to get to the patients, while in some member states it takes 4 or 5 years. So we need to change that, but as I said, again, without imposing unnecessary burden on small and medium companies.
Running out of time, so very quickly then, you talked about first and second class citizens. Does this really help that cause? You know, this legislation, is it really the equalizer that, you know, the European Union is hoping for when it comes to helping patients, but also, you know, increasing biotech innovation within Europe?
I hope that the final version will be as such, because Commission proposes, but the final version will be decided by the Parliament and the Council jointly. So I think that there is a place to make a lot of improvements. As I said, we already proposed amendments to go in that direction, to make this whole system much more friendly for small and medium companies, much better in terms of incentives to develop new medicines. So I believe that the end result can be much better than the original Commission proposal.
Okay, Vivian, I'll just quickly run through. So Vivian, next, your final thoughts then. Are you just hopeful or confident perhaps that this legislation is charting the great path forward or not?
I want to be hopeful. As MEP Sokol said, I want to believe that what we are discussing right now will be taking into account, and there will be some gradual change. What is required bureaucracy-wise can be implemented and requested gradually. The extension of the hospital exemption in combination maybe with a faster reimbursement by giving the opportunity to a country to request a drug and not having to go through the reimbursement in all 27 member states. That's also something towards this direction. So eventually, I do dream that European patients will be able to receive all breakthrough therapies. And I want EU patients to have access to clinical trials, to hospital exemption or not hospital exemption. And I want Europe to be a region particularly attractive to conduct clinical trials and develop drugs with the ultimate aim of having therapies available for people and not having therapies in the drawers midway through development, or not having therapies full developed through to marketing authorization and not being able to reimbursement and having them, having companies abandon the region because of that. So I want to be hopeful for the future.
Kristen, over to you next. I mean, should I even use the word hopeful?
In its current state, no, I'm not very hopeful, but I do hope that what we've said today and what a lot of other people have spent a lot of time preparing at Europa Bio is heard, and that will have some positive effect. The problem for me right now is that in its current state, I find it very punitive for SMEs. And one problem that really bothers me is that I don't think that any SME wants to have a second-class citizen in Europe. I think they want every patient to be a first-class citizen. That is my belief, maybe idealistic. But should it fall to the SMEs to convert some member states from the status of second class to first class? That, I think, is mission impossible. And that's the problem with some of this legislation, is that the burden on the SMEs is very, very high. It's kind of saying, oh, let's push all of this back onto you. You want to take over and solve antimicrobial resistance? Well, 1 year extra voucher. Here, but now it's your problem. And I think that we need to accept that this is not going to fall all onto the SMEs to solve every single problem just by giving them a few small incentives and by saying, okay, maybe we don't decrease any of your regulatory data protection, but we don't add anything to it either. But, here, go out and solve the world's problems. And I think that this is why I'm really not very hopeful. There needs to be concrete actions in place which are add responsibility for the EU, but also for each individual member state to support the SME in this conversion.
I have to say that my energy is quite depleted with this legislation. Final thoughts, Hilda?
I would like to end on a positive note. There are many initiatives ongoing, and collaboration there is key. A collaboration is built upon trust and a balanced relationship. I don't think that the proposal as such is balanced. We know from Andy Lowe, who's the great economist at MIT, that at this moment, Big Pharma has a 3% excess in return, whereas we know that the true innovation is with SMEs, biotech SMEs. We have a great potential in Europe. I think we can do much more to reinforce our position, but indeed collaboration and interdisciplinary education is key. The right people, the right place, with the right mindset.
And with the right legislation, obviously. Okay, well, listen, we've gone a little bit over, but many, many thanks to Tomislav Sokol, Vivian, and the great ladies next to me, Kristen and Hilda. Sometimes when we have these conversations, we can't always, laugh along. It can't always be positive. But hopefully, the kind of, icebergs ahead that all of the panelists have raised can perhaps energize everyone in the room, everyone watching online, anyone who is legislating on this, to re-energize this legislation and get it really working for the benefit, not just of biotech industry, but also for the people. Well, listen, look, it's been a pleasure to be hosting this debate. Thank you to everyone who has been with us today, to you, the audience, in the room and online, and also to the panelists. From myself and to Europa Bio, Euractiv, thank you so much and take care and bye-bye.